Today I'm going to be talking about these things, Platypods, made by an American company of the same name, which are offered as an alternative camera support system rather than having to lug around a tripod. But are they actually any good? And what are the pros and cons when comparing them against a small tabletop tripod? Well, these are the questions which I'll try and answer in this video, together with comparing these three different versions of the Platypod. So if any of that interests you, then please stick around. Now then, good to be with you all again. So in this video, I'm first going to be going through the basics of the three different Platypods I have with me, and then I'll highlight the reasons why you might want to get one in preference to, say, a small tabletop tripod. But the Platypod isn't perfect, and so I'll then go through some of the negatives and highlight why you might be better off with a small tabletop tripod, which hopefully will help you decide if the Platypod is the right thing for you. However, since starting work on this video, only one of the models I'll be mentioning is actually now available as new, but of course some people might be seeking to purchase these as second hand. Now, although I've only been using Platypods for the last year or so, they've actually been around for some time, nearly 10 years, and they're quite a novel camera support system with a very simple design. They're essentially just a piece of flat metal plating made from aircraft grade aluminium or aluminum, depending upon where you are. They have a 3/8 inch thread made of titanium, onto which you then attach your own tripod ball head. And having placed your camera on top of that, you then position the whole thing onto a suitable surface, be it a tabletop, the ground, a bench, a wall, or you can even strap it to an upright post or tree. There are a number of holes drilled and cut into the metal plate, some of which take these included screw-in stainless steel metal spikes, which can then be used as legs on uneven surfaces. They can be used either with the spiky or the plastic end facing downwards, depending upon the surface you're standing it on. Other holes can take 1/4 inch screw-in accessories, such as these gooseneck supports made by Platypod, onto which you can then attach either lights or clamps, which can make the Platypod a very useful self-contained platform, suitable for either tabletop product or macro photography. Now, the first Platypod I bought was this, the Ultra, which is the smallest, lightest and cheapest of the three Platypods I'll be discussing today. And even though it is small and light, I could potentially use it with my Canon R5 together with the RF 70-200 2.8 lens. I say potentially because you have to swing the camera and lens round in order to counterbalance the weight. And whilst I could use this combination on a flat, smooth surface, it's not as stable on more challenging terrain. It should also be noted that the company only rates the Ultra as being able to support up to 900 grams, which is just shy of the weight of the 70-200 lens on its own. But for larger setups, you're better off using one of the other two larger Platypods, such as either this, the Max, which being bigger is obviously heavier than the Ultra, and then there's the Extreme, which has not only superseded the Max as the largest version that the company offer, but is in fact now the only version on offer by the company, though there are still some twin packs of the Ultra still available. And as you can see, the Extreme is more or less a fusion of the other two models. It's the same overall size as the Max, but has the cutout styling of the Ultra, which means that it's lighter than the Max. It's also the most expensive of the three models. And as I said, both the Max and the Extreme are more suitable for larger setups, such as the R5 with the 70-200. Curiously though, the company don't actually specify a weight limitation for these models. The company's website merely states that they're suitable for everything heavier than the limitation imposed on the Ultra. The most notable feature of the Extreme is that the stainless steel legs are actually attached to the body of the plate, allowing you to swing them down as and when you need to use them, and then swinging them back up when finished. With the other two versions, you have to physically screw the steel legs in every time you want to use them, and you have to make sure that they're either fully screwed in or that the washers are fully tightened down, otherwise the legs wobble. And when you're finished, you have to remove and store the legs appropriately. With the Max, the legs are stored magnetically in a caddy on the plate itself, which can actually be removed if needs be. Whilst with the Ultra, they're stored in a pouch, which means that you have something else to carry and potentially misplace or lose. the Extreme is by far the easiest and most convenient to use with regards to these little legs. The process with the other two is so faffy and cumbersome that I'll just try and get away without using them whenever I can. Well, the first reason you might consider buying a Platypod is for those occasions when it's not possible or maybe practical to use a tripod. For example, I bought the Ultra when I was planning a trip to Prague about this time last year. And whilst I didn't actually get to go on that trip, I was aware that many of the venues that we'd intended to go and visit prohibited the use of tripods, even small tabletop tripods. But I was also aware that many photographers had successfully used Platypods without any hassle. And that's probably because they're not tripods. They don't look anything like a tripod. And they're also extremely discreet, well, especially the Ultra. With the camera on top and the Platypod placed directly on the ground, to the casual observer, it might just look as if the camera itself is sitting on the ground. Therefore, they can more or less operate under the radar without attracting the attention of the tripod police, which seem ever prevalent these days. And then there are those occasions where you might not physically be able to use a tripod, due to, say, maybe space restrictions. The small footprint of the Platypod, again especially the Ultra, isn't that much greater than that of the cameras. And so you can fit them into virtually any spot where you can fit the camera on its own, such as on a shelf, or window ledge, in a cupboard, on a mantelpiece, or right into a corner. An example of where I've used the Platypod in an awkward-ish location was for this shot taken at Canary Wharf Tube Station, where I placed the Platypod on top of the end of the escalator. The main limitation, of course, with any of these awkward locations is going to be with the available height, especially with the height of your ball head. But even then, it's still likely that the combined height of the Platypod and ball head is going to be shorter overall than that of a small tabletop tripod. Which brings me to the second reason why you might choose to go for one, and that is you can get a lot closer to the ground with one of these than you can normally get with a tripod, be it a standard or a tabletop tripod. And that's because even if you spread the tripod legs out fully flat against the ground, and assuming you don't have a centre column in the way, you still have the thickness of the tripod legs to contend with. I've now used Platypods to get low angle shots in a wide variety of settings, including for landscapes and for urban shooting. But of course, for each of these I could have just as easily have used a tripod with its legs flat out against the ground. But the results that you get will be dependent very much on the size of tripod and the size of ball head. As I said earlier, the thickness of the legs itself is going to limit how low you can get to the ground. And this can be seen in these three images taken more or less at the same time with the same settings. One with a Platypod on the left, one with a tabletop tripod in the middle, and one with a standard tripod on the right. And the latter two both have their legs flat out against the ground. And there is a little bit more foreground within the Platypod image, although the tabletop tripod isn't that far behind. With the two tripod shots, to get the same degree of foreground interest, or even a little bit more, you can very easily tilt the camera forward. But you have to be mindful of the impact that this will have on vertical lines. It all depends on the degree of foreground interest that you need as to how much the Platypod is going to make a difference to you. But one problem when using a tripod, especially a larger tripod with the legs flat out and using wide angle lenses, is that of potentially getting the legs of the tripod in shot, which of course isn't a problem with the Platypod. But it's probably going to be with tabletop photography where you'll get the main benefit of low shooting with the Platypod. But with the Platypod, you can get even lower by dispensing with the ball head altogether. This Swiss Arca compatible adapter plate made by Platypod, as well as being able to be used on Swiss Arca compatible ball heads, also has a 3/8 inch receptor underneath, which allows you to then screw the whole thing directly onto the Platypod. This therefore means that you can have the camera lens virtually touching the ground. You can then use the steel spikes to make any necessary micro adjustments for angles and height, etc. And this is the method that I use for this particular shot. In the past, I'd have had to use a combination of table mats or lens caps, etc. whenever I needed an ultra low angle shot but still needed to position the lens up or down slightly. But this adapter plate isn't without issues, as I'll cover later when I talk about the disadvantages. Of course, many tripods such as my own tripod allow you to remove the centre column and invert it. This can then get you even lower than you can get with a Platypod, low enough to actually touch the ground if needs be. And this is the main method I previously used to use in order to get low angle shots when outside. However, this method has a couple of disadvantages. With your camera inverted, it becomes more challenging to interact with it, either to change settings or to change your composition. And this is because the camera's upside down. As such, the controls can be harder to access. Also, everything is essentially working back to front. The Platypod therefore can make it so much easier to get low angle shots. The camera is the right way up, and if you need to make any changes to settings, you can, if needed, very easily just pick the whole thing up and then plonk it back down when finished. But of course, there's always the option just to sit the camera directly on the ground, as I've done myself on many occasions. But you're probably going to have issues getting the whole thing level, dependent upon the surface you're on, and the lens might end up tipping forwards, and so you're therefore going to need to stick something under the front of it. Again, maybe a lens cap in order to tilt it back up. And so you won't have the same level of control. Therefore, as I said earlier, the Platypod is an excellent tool for assisting with ultra low angle shooting. Now, as I've already mentioned, you can get low angle shots when using a standard tripod with the legs fully flat out at ground level. However, one additional problem is that many, like my own, don't actually allow you to lock the tripod legs at this angle. Therefore, when interacting with the camera, you can potentially knock it out of alignment, or the whole thing might just wobble. So the third reason to potentially consider the Platypod is that of stability. I found them to provide an extremely stable platform, provided that is, you pair the right Platypod to the right size of your setup. One anomaly with the tripods is that the shorter a tripod is when the legs are at their shallowest angle, the less stable they can become, especially with larger setups. You therefore have to ensure that your lens hangs over one of the legs for maximum stability. And even then, it can be very easy to topple the whole thing over when you're interacting with the camera. To give a small tripod more stability, you can of course spread the legs out wider, but sometimes when locked at their lowest level, i.e. not lying flat on the ground, there is often a little bit of flex. The Platypod stability demonstrated itself for me when I filmed my previous review of the Canon R8. For this, I used a pair of Platypods, the R8 on one, and my R5, which was doing the filming, on the other. This allowed me to film the rear screen of the R8 whilst I interacted with it to show the menus, etc. without any hints of wobbling, nor any concern that I might tip the whole thing over. Of course, a pair of small tabletop tripods locked at their lowest available level would probably have served just as well. But if, as I had, you have both cameras close together, you then have the risk of both sets of tripod legs getting in each other's way. My final reason why you might consider buying a Platypod, and for me personally one of the main advantages, is that of ease of carry. These things, being just a piece of flat metal plate, take up very little space in your bag. In fact, it'll be the ball head that will be the bulkier item. My Ultra, together with its leg pouch and strap, easily fits into the spot normally reserved for a tablet in my smaller camera bag, a Peak Design 6 litre everyday sling, with wads of room to spare. The small ball head I use with it, which comes from an old Ciru tripod, easily slips into the front zip section. And as it takes up so little room, I'll now more often not have the Ultra in this bag, just in case I might need it. But I wouldn't dream of taking a small tripod out with me every time. They're just too bulky and cumbersome. And my Max, which comes with this little pouch, lives most of the time in the laptop sleeve of my main camera bag, although it could slot in virtually anywhere within the main section of the bag. With the Max, the ball head I often use is Platypod's own ball head, which just slots into one of the spaces in the bag. Let me know if you're interested in a review of this. But if I was also taking my main tripod and wanted to save a bit of weight, I could easily dispense with the additional ball head and just rip off the ball head from my main tripod as and when I needed to use it on the Platypod. In fact, the Platypods are so small and easy to carry that I can even fit them into a jacket pocket. Stripped down, I can have the max plate in one pocket and the ball head in another. But with the Ultra, I can actually fit the combined plate and head within a single pocket. You can also fasten the Platypod to the outside of a bag or to a belt by means of a carabiner, one of which comes supplied with the Ultra and Extreme Platypods. Now, whilst I wouldn't necessarily take a small tabletop tripod out with me every time just in case I needed it, they too can be relatively easy to accommodate. But often as not, you're likely to be carrying it on the outside of your bag, maybe nestled into a side pocket, which can easily advertise to others that you're potentially carrying camera gear. And so, if you like to travel more discreetly, a Platypod might be just the thing for you. Another small advantage. But not everything is in the Platypod's favour. There are times and reasons when a small tabletop tripod might be a better option. And the first of these is sheer versatility. A tabletop tripod will allow you to set up on a wider range of terrain, especially where there are larger rocks, stones or gaps to cater for. You can just spread the legs out and adjust them as required. And whilst the Platypod is excellent for low angle shots, you're more restricted if you want more height. In such situations, you have to seek out a suitable perch on which to place the Platypod camera combination, such as on a bench, wall or railing. As I mentioned earlier, you can even strap it to an upright post or tree. But only the Ultra comes with a strap included. You have to source one as an optional extra with the other two models. But having to seek out a suitable perch will more than likely constrain your compositional options. There's very little chance that the height, angle and view will be exactly as you would ideally want it to be. With a small tabletop tripod, you'll have just that little bit of extra height at your disposal, which sometimes might be all that you need. However, even with a small tabletop tripod, you might still find that you might need additional height on occasion, and so again, you'll need to find a suitable perch. And quite possibly, it could be harder to position a tripod dependent upon the space available, which again might make the Platypod a better option in such cases. But there is a way to get extra height with the Platypod, even to match that of a small tabletop tripod, and that is to use an extension column. Coincidentally, Platypod themselves make a column they call the handle. Now, I don't have one of these, but potentially any extension or centre column from a tripod will work, as long as it has a 3/8 inch threaded slot in its base so that you can attach it to the Platypod, and a thread on top that you can then fasten your ball head to. But you have to be careful not to use a column that's too tall, otherwise it can become woefully unstable. By way of guidance, Platypod's own handle goes from 3 inches up to a maximum height of 10.5 inches. And provided you don't go too tall and use one of the larger Platypods, this can be as or even more stable than a tabletop tripod of the same height. However, if you're going to start carrying an extension column along with the Platypod together with a ball head, a strap, and in the case of the Ultra, the steel legs case, then the ease of carry argument starts to become a little challenged. Also, putting all these bits together can become rather faffy. Which then leads me to another advantage of small tripods, and that is speed and ease of use. With a small tripod, you just rock up, attach the camera, deploy the legs, make an adjustment or two, and away you go. With the Platypod, you need to attach the ball head, possibly screw in the steel legs, unless you've got the Extreme, making sure to tighten the washers on the legs, and if using an extension column, you've got that to attach as well. And then of course, you've got it all to dismantle afterwards. Now I mentioned earlier about using a Platypod without a ball head and attaching it directly via an adapter plate to the camera, and that this came with some issues. And these issues sort of fit into this section on ease of use, or more precisely, the problem of use for the Platypod. First, having screwed the adapter plate, camera and the Platypod together, the camera might not actually end up facing along the length of the Platypod. It may end up pointing in any direction, which could potentially be unstable, especially if using the Ultra. And of course, you have no means of then rotating the adapter plate further, other than to tighten it even more. But if you do over tighten it, you'll find that the adapter plate is an absolute pain in the proverbial to remove. Being circular, you can't get a good enough grip on it in order to remove it. And the first time I used it like this, I ended up having to use a wrench to help loosen it. And of course, if you don't tighten it in order to ensure the camera is facing the right way, you'll find that the camera is loose. There is an alternative, however, and that is to use a panorama head, such as this one, which can also be directly attached to the Platypod. And these have the advantage of allowing you to adjust the rotation of the camera once on the Platypod. Another issue if using either the Ultra or the Max without a ball head and using Platypod's own adapter plate is that you may have problems using the steel legs. Depending upon your camera's size and the lens used, you might find that you can't actually screw the camera and adapter plate onto the Platypod, as the legs, if set too high, might get in the way. And even if you attach the camera and adapter first, with the Ultra, the camera or the lens themselves can block the legs actually being screwed in from above. Again, more reasons to use an alternative adapter plate rather than Platypod's own. Beyond all of that, regardless of whatever configuration you use with the Platypod, it can be a very laborious process to get the whole thing stable, let alone level using these little legs. With a tripod, even a small tabletop tripod, you don't have any of these issues. Even if you dispense with a ball head and attach the panel plate direct, you can manipulate the setup by a combination of leg angles and leg length. So using a small tabletop tripod is way easier and quicker than using a Platypod. Another potential problem with the Platypod comes when you want to shoot in portrait orientation. First, you might have difficulty in actually getting your camera level. You might find that having swung it over, it either rests against the plate, or if you haven't got the steel legs used, it rests against the ground. Second, you'll probably find that the Platypod is very unstable with the camera swung over into portrait orientation, especially with the Ultra. Personally, I tend to use an L bracket on my camera, which makes this a bit of a non-issue for me, but for others, it could be a big problem. Again, with a small tripod, you don't have any of these restrictions, as you can just spread the legs out to provide more stability when you tip the camera over into portrait orientation. Another significant problem with the Platypod, however, is its availability, or lack of it. There are very few places from where you can actually get them. In fact, outside of buying direct from Platypod, there are only 4 authorised dealers listed, 3 in the States and 1 in Germany. But possibly the biggest criticism of the Platypod is that of value for money. And that's because you can get small tabletop tripods here in the UK from as little as 20 quid. Not only are the Platypods relatively expensive for what they are, being just a piece of flat metal plate, but unless you've got a spare ball head lying around, you'll also need to factor in the cost of one of those. Even many cheap tabletop tripods often come with a ball head. Okay, they might not be that good, but they might just be good enough. And if you go for one of the larger Platypods and want the strap, you'll also have to factor that into the overall cost as well. Oh, and maybe even an extension column and one of those adapter plates. And so they can start to look even more expensive. There are some cheaper, no-name Far Eastern versions available from the usual places, and you could possibly even make one yourself if you have the relevant tools and necessary skills. After all, it's just a piece of flat metal plate with a thread attached. What could be easier? Well, of course, one of the things you have to consider is the robustness of the thread in both those options. Remember, that's going to have to take the weight of your camera gear, especially if you strap it to an upright post or tree. So what are my final thoughts then on the Platypods? Should you get one? Well, it all depends. Without doubt, the Platypods are a well-designed and well-constructed piece of kit. And despite all the criticisms I've levelled at them, for what they're designed to do, they do it very well, on the whole. However, here's the thing. A small tabletop tripod can deliver most of what the Platypod offers, plus a little bit more. They're more versatile in that they'll usually provide a little more height and can be used on more varied terrain. They're quicker and simpler to deploy and use overall, and in most cases a lot cheaper to buy. And whilst you might not be able to get as close to the ground as you can with a Platypod, for most situations, especially when shooting outdoors, it probably won't make that much difference. And so for many, if not most photographers, a small tabletop tripod will be the obvious choice. The Platypod will be seen by such photographers as a bit of a luxury, a nice to have rather than a must have. But, if you regularly shoot at very low angles, or want a very stable self-contained platform for shooting either macro or product tabletop photography, or you shoot where it's not permissible or maybe practical to use a tripod, or you just want the smallest, lightest camera support system in your bag, and if you can justify the expense either to yourself or to your other half, then the Platypods are well worth considering. And despite all the various limitations I've highlighted in this video, I actually like them. Are they a replacement for a tripod? No. But nor is a tabletop tripod a replacement for a full-size one. They each have their own role to play with their own strengths and weaknesses. For me, I see the Platypod as complementary to a tripod. You can easily fit one of these into any camera bag, even if you're taking your main tripod along with you, which, if you shoot low angles, can make life a lot easier. And for those occasions where you want to travel as light and as compact as possible and shun a tripod altogether, they can give you that degree of flexibility to get images that you might otherwise not be able to capture. And whilst the Ultra is without doubt the best choice for portability, the Extreme is the best all-rounder for versatility, ease of use and maximum stability. And as this is now the only version available that you can get new, the question of which one to get is rather mute. The company have announced that a new version of the Ultra will be available next year. Hopefully it'll inherit the same or similar leg design as the Extreme. And even though this may well increase the size slightly, I think it will be a positive move. Well, I hope that's been of use to some of you. Until next time, thank you ever so much for watching. Take care. TTFN. Ta-ta for now.